Hello guys! Welcome back to my channel, a channel that discusses very dramatic movie stories, guys. In this video, I'll take you to watch a very dramatic movie about this story, entitled, My New Daddy is a 5-Star General. Before this story begins, don't forget to hit subscribe and like. Instead of just being curious, let's continue watching this video until the end. Okay?
The journey toward the truth began in the sterile, scentless corridors of a small-town clinic where Jessica Thompson received the news that would shatter her world. Her young son, Caden, had collapsed at school again, and the diagnosis was a parent's ultimate nightmare. A rapidly growing brain tumor that required immediate, specialized surgery costing over $100,000. For years, Jessica had survived on the belief that her husband, Patrick Moore, was a regular soldier serving on a dangerous, classified mission overseas. She had raised Caden alone, clinging to the few $1,000s he sent and the promise that he was fighting for their future. Desperate to save her son's life, Jessica traveled to the massive military base where Patrick was stationed, hoping to find a father's love and the financial support needed for the life-saving procedure. She never expected that the gates of the base would lead her not to a hero, but to a web of lies and a betrayal that chewed deeper than any physical wound. The reality Jessica encountered at the base was a cruel mockery of her 8-year sacrifice. Patrick Moore was not overseas. He had been at the base the entire time, having risen to the rank of lieutenant colonel. More devastatingly, he had abandoned his life with Jessica to marry Megan, the arrogant daughter of a powerful colonel, using the marriage as a stepping stone to accelerate his military career. When Jessica finally confronted him, Patrick didn't offer an apology or a drop of empathy for his dying son. Instead, he looked at her with disgust, calling her a backwater quack and demanding a divorce to secure his impending promotion to colonel. He had even embraced Megan's son, Andrew, as his own, openly admitting that he loved the child of his high-ranking wife more than his biological son, Caden. Patrick transformed the medical emergency into a tool for blackmail, refusing to pay for Caden's surgery unless Jessica signed away all her rights and vanished from his polished new life forever. In the midst of this darkness, a chance encounter at a local toy store introduced a new variable into Jessica's struggle for justice. While she struggled to afford even a $50 toy for Caden, a mysterious and composed man named James intervened, buying Caden a sophisticated $2,000 drone as an act of genuine kindness. Jessica had no more idea that James was actually General James Wilson, the highest-ranking officer at the base and the man Patrick feared most. As Patrick and Megan continued to torment Jessica, even forcing her to work as their servant in exchange for the surgery, Jessica discovered a hidden video that exposed Patrick's darkest secret: the brutal torture and murder of a subordinate soldier years ago. When Caden's condition reached a critical point following a physical altercation provoked by Megan, the tension peaked at the hospital. As Patrick attempted to physically assault Jessica to reclaim the evidence, General Wilson arrived in full authority, marking the moment where the betrayed wife would finally rise and the heartless lieutenant colonel would face the true meaning of military justice. The air in the hospital waiting room was thick with the metallic scent of antiseptic and the heavy silence of impending doom. Jessica sat on the edge of a plastic chair, her knuckles white as she gripped the handle of her worn-out bag. Inside the bag lay the flash drive, the digital ghost of Patrick's crimes that felt heavier than lead. She looked through the glass partition at Caden, who lay pale and still under a mesh of wires, his small chest rising and falling with a fragility that made her soul ache. The world outside these walls didn't care about a mother's desperation, but inside her heart, a fire was beginning to burn. fueled by the realization that the man she had loved was a monster wearing a patriot's uniform. She remembered the way he had looked at her in the base, not with the eyes of a husband, but with the cold, calculating gaze of a man who saw his family as a loose end that needed to be severed for the sake of a silver eagle on his shoulder. Megan Moore paced the hallway like a caged tigress, her designer heels clicking a sharp, rhythmic warning against the linoleum floor. Teher, this wasn't a medical emergency. It was a PR disaster. She hissed at Patrick, her voice a low, venomous staccato, demanding to know why Jessica was still allowed to breathe the same air as them. My father is a colonel, Patrick. If this hillbilly ruins your promotion, you will make sure you're scrubbing latrines in Alaska by morning. Patrick stood rigid, his jaw set in a permanent line of tension. He was caught between the woman who owned his career and the woman who owned his secrets. Every time he looked at Jessica, he saw the ghost of the man he used to be, and it filled him with a murderous self-loathing that he projected outward as cruelty. He wasn't just fighting Jessica. He was fighting the inevitable collapse of the gilded cage he had built for himself. Jessica closed her eyes and saw the image of James the general, who had treated her with more dignity in 5 minutes than Patrick had in 8 years. She remembered the way his eyes had softened when he spoke to Caden, a contrast to the icy indifference of the military elite she had encountered. James hadn't looked at her clothes or her worn-out shoes. He had looked at her spirit. She wondered if he knew the truth about the base he commanded. She wondered if a 5-star general would truly care about the plight of a discarded wife and a sick child. The drone he had bought Caden sat in its box at the foot of the bed, a symbol of a world where kindness still existed, even if it was hidden behind the stern facade of a high-ranking officer. Jessica realized that she was no more longer just a victim. She was a witness, and the truth she carried had the power to level the mountains Patrick thought he had climbed. The silence of the night was broken by the sudden arrival of Patrick's father-in-law, Colonel Jones. He walked with the heavy, arrogant gait of a man who believed the world was his private barracks. He didn't even acknowledge Jessica as he approached Patrick, his voice booming with a false joviality. The board is meeting in 48 hours, Patrick. Everything is in place for your promotion. Itras será no more complications. Patrick's eyes flickered toward Jessica, a flash of panic crossing his face before he smoothed it into a mask of military discipline. None, sir. Just some family business from back home. It's being handled. The word handled sent a chill down Jessica's spine. She knew what that meant in Patrick's world. It meant silence. It meant disappearance. It meant that her son's life was being weighed against a promotion, and the scale was tipped heavily toward the latter. In the early hours of the morning, while the hospital was shrouded in a gray, misty twilight, Jessica found herself in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of cold, bitter coffee. A shadow fell across the table, and she looked up to see James. He wasn't in uniform this time. Just a simple dark jacket and jeans, but the aura of authority still clung to him like a second skin. You haven't slept, he remarked, his voice a calm anchor in her stormy thoughts. Jessica shook her head, unable to find the words to explain the magnitude of her fear. He's a strong boy, Jessica. Caden has the heart of a soldier. James sat across from her, his presence providing a strange sense of sanctuary. He didn't ask about her husband or her situation. He simply sat with her, offering the silent support of a man who had seen too many battles to be intimidated by the one Jessica was currently fighting. Jessica felt a sudden urge to tell him everything about the video, the murder, the betrayal. But the habit of secrecy was a hard one to break. She had spent 8 years believing Patrick's lies, and her trust was a shattered mirror. Instead, she asked him, "Why did you help us at the toy store? You didn't even know us." James looked out the window at the rising sun, his expression unreadable. Because power without empathy is just tyranny. Jessica, I've seen men use their rank to crush those below them, and I've never had much patience for it. He looked back at her, his gaze piercing. Sometimes, the most important missions don't happen on a battlefield. They happen in the quiet moments when you decide what kind of person you're going to be. In that moment, Jessica felt a shift in the atmosphere. She realized that James wasn't just a benefactor. He was a potential ally in a war she was tired of fighting alone. The internal conflict within Jessica intensified as the deadline for Cadence surgery approached. The hospital administrator had already warned her that without the deposit, they would be forced to postpone the procedure, a delay Cadence's fragile brain could not afford. Patrick had made his final offer, the money in exchange for the flash drive and a signed non-disclosure agreement. Jessica stood in the hospital bathroom, splashing cold water on her face, staring at her reflection. She saw a woman who had been pushed to the edge, but she also saw a mother who would burn the world down to save her child. She realized that if she gave Patrick the fidel, he would win. He would become a colonel, and he would continue his cycle of violence and deceit. But if she didn't, her son might die. It was a choice between her conscience and her heart, and the weight of it was suffocating. Megan's cruelty reached a new peak when she entered Caden's room while Jessica was out getting a glass of water. She stood over the sleeping boy, her face twisted in a sneer of aristocratic disdain. "You're just like your mother," she whispered, her voice a sharp hiss. "A burden, a mistake." When Jessica returned and found Megan near her son, she felt a primal surge of protective rage. She demanded Megan leave, but the colonel's daughter only laughed, her eyes cold and predatory. "Enjoy this room while you can, Jessica. Once Patrick gets his promotion, we're moving to Deche, and you'll be lucky if you can afford a bus ticket back to your trailer park." The classism was a blunt instrument Megan used to remind Jessica of her place, but Jessica only stood taller. She realized that Megan's power was entirely dependent on her father and her husband, while Jessica's power came from a place Megan could never understand, the unconditional love for a child. The following night, the base was abuzz with preparations for the promotion ceremony. Patrick was the man of the hour, his uniform pressed to perfection, his medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. He felt untouchable. He had convinced himself that Jessica was too weak to follow through on her threats. He had sent his men to encourage her to leave the city, assuming that a little physical intimidation would be enough to break her. But Patrick had underestimated the resilience of a woman who had already survived 8 years of abandonment. Jessica hadn't left. She had gone back to the base, using the surface entrance she had learned while working as their maid. She needed to find one more piece of evidence, the logbooks from the night of the accident 3 years ago. She moved through the shadows of the administrative wing, her heart hammering. A silent ghost in the machinery of Patrick's ambition. Jessica found the records office guarded by a young private who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She used her knowledge of the base's routines to wait for the shift change, slipping into the room during the 3-minute window of vulnerability. The air was dry and smelled of old paper and ozone. She scanned the shelves, her fingers trembling as she searched for the 2023 logs. When she finally found the folder, she realized that the pages for that specific night had been torn out. But Patrick had been sloppy. The indentations of his pen were still visible on the following page: a list of names, a timestamp, and a single, chilling word, "disposed." The confirmation of his cold-blooded nature was a physical blow. She took a photo of the page with her phone, the flash a tiny explosion of light in the darkness. She was no more longer just a wife seeking child support. She was a whistleblower about to dismantle a military career built on blood. The morning of Cadence surgery arrived with a grim, overcast sky. Jessica was back at the hospital, her eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep but her resolve harder than diamond. Patrick and Megan arrived shortly after, flanked by a private security detail they had hired to ensure Jessica's cooperation. Patrick walked up to her, his voice a low, threatening growl. "This is it, Jessica, the papers or the kid Diaz. I've already told the hospital to put a hold on the funds. One word from me and they stop the anesthesia." Jessica looked him in the eye, her voice steady and clear. "You would really let your own son die for a title, Patrick?" Patrick didn't even flinch. "He was dead to me the moment you brought him here. Sign the papers." Jessica pulled the flash drive from her pocket, holding it up like a holy relic. "I have the video, Patrick, and I have the logs from the base. I know what happened to Private Miller." The mention of Private Miller turned Patrick's face a ghostly shade of gray. His hand went instinctively to his side, as if searching for a weapon he didn't have in the hospital. Megan looked between them, her eyes darting with suspicion. "What is she talking about, Patrick? Who is Private Miller?" Patrick ignored her, his focus entirely on Jessica. "You think anyone will believe you? You're a nobody. I'm a lieutenant colonel with the support of the highest-ranking officers on this base." Jessica stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade. "I don't need everyone to believe me. I just need one person to see the truth. And I think I know someone who will care very much about what you did to a soldier under your command." She turned to walk toward the administration office, but Patrick grabbed her arm, his grip bruising and desperate. "You're not going anywhere," Patrick roared, his professional facade finally shattering into a thousand jagged pieces. He raised his hand to strike her, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. Megan cheered him on from the sidelines, her face a mirror of his cruelty. "Do it, Patrick! Teach her a lesson!" The security guards moved in to block the hallway, ensuring no more witnesses could see the assault. Jessica braced herself, her eyes fixed on Cadence's door, ready to take the blow if it meant protecting the truth. But the blow never came. A voice, cold and sharp as a winter wind, sliced through the chaos. "Lieutenant Colonel Moore, stand down immediately." The authority in the voice was absolute, a sound that demanded instant, instinctive obedience from every soldier in the room. The hallway froze. Patrick's hand stopped inches from Jessica's face, his body trembling with the sudden influx of adrenaline and fear. He turned slowly, his eyes wide with disbelief. TC General James Wilson standing at the end of the corridor. James was in full dress uniform now, the 5 stars on his shoulders gleaming like predatory eyes. He walked toward them with a slow, deliberate pace that felt like the approach of an executioner. Behind him stood a team of military police, their faces set in stone. James didn't look at Patrick. He looked at Jessica. A brief flash of concern crossing his face before it returned to a mask of stern command. "Release her arm, Moore." "The Tisan order." Patrick's hand fell away as if he'd been burned, his posture collapsing into a frantic, shaking salute. "General, sir, I was just dealing with a security threat," Patrick stammered, his voice several octaves higher than usual. "This woman is an intruder. She's been harassing my family." James held up a hand, silencing him instantly. "I am well aware of who this woman is, Patrick. She is the mother of your child, the child who is currently dying while you play games with hospital funds." James turned to the MP commander. "Take the lieutenant colonel into custody. Charge him with conduct unbecoming of an officer, child endangerment, and the suspected murder of Private Miller. We will be conducting a full forensic audit of his records." Megan began to scream, her voice a shrill, hysterical sound of falling privilege. "You can't do this! My father is a colonel. He'll have your stars for this. James didn't even look at her. Your father is being detained as we speak for his role in the cover-up. The Moore Jones era of corruption is over. As the MPS led a shouting, struggling Patrick and a sobbing Meghan away, the hospital hallway returned the semblance of peace. James walked over to Jessica, who was shaking with the aftershocks of the confrontation. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of genuine human comfort. The funds have been released, Jessica. The surgery starts in 10 minutes. My personal medical team is already inside with Caden. Jessica looked at him, her eyes filled with tears of relief. Thank you, James. I don't know how we can ever. James shook his head, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. You don't owe me anything. You did the hard part. You stood up when everyone told you to sit down. He looked through the glass at Caden. Now, go be with your son. He's going to need his mommy when he wakes up. The internal architecture of the military base underwent a seismic shift in the weeks following Patrick's arrest. The investigation revealed a massive network of corruption, led by Colonel Jones and executed by ambitious officers like Patrick. The accident of Private Miller was just the tip of the iceberg. James utilized the evidence Jessica had provided to purge the ranks, ensuring that merit and integrity were once again the only path to promotion. He became a national hero, a symbol of the military's ability to self-correct and protect its own. But for James, the real victory was much quieter. He spent his weekends at the hospital, bringing books and games for Caden, who was recovering with a speed that baffled the doctors. He saw in the young boy the same resilience he had seen in the mother, a strength that didn't need a uniform to be powerful. Caden's recovery was a period of intense healing for Jessica as well. She finally felt the weight of 8 years of loneliness begin to lift. She was no more longer a backwater quack or a discarded wife. She was a woman who had outplayed a lieutenant colonel and saved her son's life. The story of her courage spread through the community, turning her into a beacon of hope for other women who felt trapped by powerful men. She used the settlement from the military to open a foundation for the families of soldiers who had been mistreated by the system. She named it the Caden James Alliance, a tribute to the two men who had changed her life, one by his existence and the other by his honor. The relationship between Jessica and James evolved into something much deeper than just a benefactor and a victim. They found in each other a shared language of duty and resilience. James saw in Jessica a woman who had fought a war on the home front with more courage than many of his soldiers had shown in combat. Jessica saw in James a man who used his 5 stars not as a shield, but as a sword for the defenseless. They spent their evenings walking through the parks near the base, talking about a future that wasn't defined by titles or ranks. James eventually retired from the military, wanting to focus on a life where he could be James instead of General. He had spent his life protecting a nation. Patrick Moore's final days in the military were spent in a cold, gray cell, waiting for a court-martial that would eventually sentence him to life in prison. He lost everything: his rank, his marriage to Meghan, and his self-respect. He sat in the darkness, haunted by the image of Jessica standing tall in the hospital hallway, the flash drive in her hand. He realized too late that rule number 1 of the military was the same as rule number 1 of life: you never leave a soldier behind. And by leaving his son and his wife behind, he had guaranteed his own destruction. He was a footnote in a history book of scandal, a man who traded his soul for a promotion and ended up with nothing but the silence of his own choices. The narrative concludes with a final image of a sunny afternoon at a lake near the base. Caden, now healthy and vibrant, is running along the shore, the drone James had bought him buzzing in the air above. He laughs as the drone performs a series of complicated maneuvers, his eyes bright with the joy of a life that was almost taken from him. Jessica and James are sitting on a blanket nearby, watching him with a quiet, profound contentment. Jessica leans her head on James's shoulder, a gesture of absolute trust. She realizes that while her first daddy was a lie, her new daddy is a hero. The five-star general had become the father Caden deserved and the partner Jessica had always dreamed of. The betrayed wife had not just risen, she had arrived. As the credits roll on this 60-minute journey, we see a final montage of the Caden James Foundation in action. We see women receiving legal aid, children getting medical treatments, and a community being rebuilt on the principles of integrity and empathy. The camera zooms in on a photo on Jessica's desk. It is a picture of the three of them at the toy store, the day everything changed. Underneath the photo, a single quote is engraved: "The true measure of a man is not how high he rises, but how many people he helps to rise with him." This is the legacy of the general and the mother, a story of a love that was forged in betrayal and a justice that was born from the heart. The internal architecture of the new base, under the leadership of James's successor, was designed to foster a culture of transparency and accountability. A memorial was built for Private Miller and other soldiers who had been victims of the Jones Moore corruption. Jessica was invited to give the keynote speech at the dedication ceremony, standing before a sea of uniforms with a dignity that commanded absolute silence. She didn't speak of revenge, she spoke of the responsibility of power. "A uniform is just cloth," she told them. "It is the person inside it who defines whether it is a symbol of hope or a tool of oppression." James stood in the front row, no more longer a general, just a man who was immensely proud of the woman he loved. Megan Jones, formerly Moore, eventually tried to reinvent herself in the social circles of Deche, but the stain of her father's scandal was too deep. She was a social pariah, a woman whose name was synonymous with cruelty and elitism. She spent her days in a state of bitter reflection, blaming everyone but herself for her downfall. She realized too late that her father's Colonel's eagles were no more protection against the consequences of a hollow soul. She was a ghost of a life that no more longer existed, a stark contrast to Jessica, who had turned her pain into a lighthouse for others. The hillbilly wife Megan had mocked was now the most respected woman in the state, while Megan was just a forgotten chapter in a shameful story. Caden grew up with two fathers: the memory of a man who failed him and the presence of a man who chose him. He learned from Patrick how not to lead, and from James how to be a hero. He decided to join the military himself, not for the rank or the power, but for the service. He wanted to be the kind of officer James was: a man who protected the defenseless and stood up for the truth, no more matter the cost. On the day of Caden's graduation from West Point, Jessica and James were sore, their eyes full of tears as they watched the young man take his oath. Caden looked at them and winked, a silent thank you for the life they had fought so hard to give him. The relationship between Jessica and her former self was the most profound transformation of all. She realized that the weak woman who had waited 8 years for a husband who didn't exist was actually the foundation of her current strength. Her patience, her resilience, and her capacity for hope were the very qualities that had allowed her to survive the darkness. She forgave herself for believing the lies, understanding that her love had been real, even if the man she gave it to was a fabrication. She was a woman who had lived through the fire and had come out on the other side not just as a survivor, but as an architect of a better world. The final silence of the narrative is filled with the sound of Caden's laughter echoing across the water. It's a sound of absolute freedom, of a life that is no more longer defined by a tumor or a betrayal. Jessica and James hold hands, their fingers intertwined, a symbol of a bond that was built on the wreckage of their past. They know that the world isn't perfect, and that there will always be men like Patrick Moore. But they also know that as long as there are people who are brave enough to tell the truth, the light will always find its way through the shadows. The five-star general and his queen are a home, and for the first time in their lives, the war is truly over. The transition into a life of peace was not without its challenges for James. He had lived in a world of rigid discipline and strategic combat for 40 years, and the quiet of domestic life felt strange at first. But Jessica taught him a different kind of strategy, the art of being present. She taught him how to garden, how to listen to the birds, and how to find joy in the small, mundane tasks of a day well lived. James realized that the most difficult mission he had ever undertaken was the one that required him to put down his sword and open his heart. He became a fixture in the community, a man who was respected not for his stars, but for his character. He was no more longer the general. He was James, the man who made the best pancakes in town and always had a kind word for a stranger. Jessica's memoir, The General's Wife, a story of betrayal and resilience, became an international bestseller, translated into 20 languages. It wasn't just a story about a military scandal. It was a roadmap for anyone who had ever felt invisible or discarded. She used the proceeds from the book to build the Wilson Thompson Medical Center, a state-of-the-art facility dedicated to pediatric brain research. She wanted to ensure that no more other mother would ever have to beg a heartless man for her child's life. The center became a global leader in its field, a testament to the fact that out of the darkest betrayal, a light can be born that shines for generations. Jessica was no more longer running from her past. She was using it to build a future for thousands of children she would never even meet. The annual James Wilson Leadership Award was established at the base, given each year to an officer who demonstrated extraordinary integrity and empathy in the line of duty. James was the guest of honor at the first ceremony, and he personally presented the award to a young lieutenant who had risked her career to report a case of corruption. He looked into the young officer's eyes and saw the same spark he had seen in Jessica, the refusal to be complicit in a lie. He realized then that his legacy wasn't in the battles he had won, but in the standard he had set. He had outplayed the corrupt and the cruel by simply being a man of honor, and that honor was now being carried forward by a new generation. Cadence drone eventually became more than just a toy. He used his interest in technology to develop a new type of search and rescue drone that could operate in environments too dangerous for humans. He named the prototype the James, a tribute to the man who had first given him the wings to dream. The technology was adopted by emergency services around the world, saving countless lives in the wake of natural disasters and accidents. Caden had turned his childhood fascination into a professional mission, proving that the gifts we receive in our darkest moments can become the tools we use to bring light to others. He was a five-star son, a young man who carried the strength of his mother and the honor of his new father in every fiber of his being. The narrative concludes with a final look at the toy store moment, now a legendary story in the city. People would often point to the spot where the general had met the mother, calling it the intersection of destiny. It was a reminder that you never know when a single act of kindness can change the course of history. Jessica often returned to the store, not to buy toys, but to sit on the bench outside and watch the families go by. She would see the fathers holding their sons' hands, the mothers laughing with their daughters, and she would feel a deep, abiding sense of gratitude. She had survived the Patrick Moores of the world and had found her way to the James Wilsons. The betrayal was a distant memory, a scar that had healed into a badge of honor. As the sun sets over the medical center that bears her name, Jessica stands on the balcony, looking out at the city she has helped to heal. She hears James's voice behind her, calling her tea dinner, and she smiles. The darkness of the base, the cruelty of Megan, and the heartlessness of Patrick are all gone, replaced by a life that is full and true. She realizes that she didn't need a colonel's rank or a lieutenant colonel's promotion to be powerful. She just needed to be Jessica. The queen had moved on, and in doing so, she had built a kingdom of her own, one founded on love, integrity, and the absolute victory of the heart over the shadows. The internal architecture of the military justice system was permanently altered by the Moore-Jones case. The Jessica Protocol was implemented, requiring an independent civilian oversight committee to review all disciplinary actions involving subordinates. This ensured that no more officer could ever again use their rank to silence a witness or cover up a crime. It was a victory for every soldier who had ever felt powerless against a corrupt superior. The system had been outplayed by a woman who refused to be a victim, and the result was a military that was more just, more transparent, and more worthy of the nation it served. Jessica's name was spoken with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon, a reminder that the most powerful force in the world is a person who refuses to be broken. Patrick Moore's final letter from prison was a desperate plea for forgiveness, written in a shaky hand that bore little resemblance to the confident signature that had once ordered the soldier's disposal. Jessica read it once, then slowly fed it into the shredder. Forgiveness was a private matter, one she had already settled with herself. She didn't need Patrick's apology to feel whole. She had already found her wholeness in the life she had built. She realized that Patrick's greatest punishment wasn't the prison cell. It was the knowledge that the woman he had discarded was now the most influential person in his former world, and the son he had called a bastard was now a hero in his own right. Patrick was a ghost, and Jessica was done living with ghosts. In her final years, Jessica spent her days teaching her grandchildren the value of a promise. She would tell them the story of the general and the mother, not as a drama, but as a lesson in character. She wanted them to know that their name was a responsibility, not a shield, and that true nobility was found in kindness, not in rank. She would show them the drone, now a dusty relic on a shelf, and tell them about the day a stranger chose to be a hero. She wanted her legacy to be one of hope, a reminder to the next generation that no matter how long the mission, the truth will always find its way home. Jessica was a woman of total integrity, and she was satisfied with every single second of her life. The final notes of the narration blend with the sounds of a vibrant, healthy community, a community that Jessica and James helped to shape. The streets are safe, the people are free, and the shadow of betrayal is a distant memory. The legacy of their love remains a beacon of progress, a promise that the heart's absolute victory over the shadows is not just a dream, but a reality for those who are brave enough to believe. The story is finished, but the impact is eternal. The betrayed wife has risen, and the world is a better place because she did. Goodbye to the general and the mother, and may their story live on in your heart as a reminder that the light is always, eventually, absolute. As the years moved into a new decade, the O'Reilly Sterling Wilson Medical Center became more than just a hospital. It evolved into a global hub for medical ethics. Jessica, now in her late 70s, was still a frequent presence in the lobby, often seen talking to the families of the patients. She had a way of making every person feel seen, a skill she had learned in the long, dark years when she was invisible. She would tell them, "Your struggle is not your story. It's just the chapter that prepares you for the victory." Her voice, once a whisper of desperation in a base lobby, was now a resonant authority that inspired world leaders to prioritize the health of the vulnerable. She had successfully outplayed the narrative of her youth, turning a tragedy into a global movement for dignity and care. James's role in the foundation grew as well. as he became the primary advocate for veteran reintegration programs. He used the Moore case as a study in what happens when the military loses its moral compass. He was often seen at Jessica's side at international conferences, his silent strength providing the tactical armor for her healing heart. They were a perfect synergy. Jessica provided the vision, and James provided the execution. They proved that a partnership based on truth and mutual goals was a far more powerful engine than any military rank could ever be. They had lived a life of total integrity, and they were ready for the next adventure. The anniversary of Cadence surgery was always a day of reflection for the family. They would return to the Toy Store, now a community center funded by the foundation, and spend the day giving out drones and toys to children in need. It was their private tradition, a way to remember the day the stranger became the daddy. Caden, now a father himself, would bring his own children, telling them stories about the super grandpa who bought a drone for a little boy who had nothing. The cycle of kindness had become a generational legacy, a ripple effect of a single act of empathy that had once saved the family's soul. The center was a place of joy, a direct rebuttal to the coldness that had once defined their lives. The internal peace Jessica found was not a static state, but a dynamic, growing force. She realized that by refusing to let Patrick's shadow consume her, she had allowed James's light to grow even brighter. She often imagined what her life would have been like if she had stayed in the trailer park, waiting for a man who was never coming home. The thought filled her with a profound sense of gratitude for the courage she had found in that hospital hallway. She had outplayed her own fear, outlasted her own grief, and outlived the memory of the man who had failed her. She was Jessica, and she was enough. The narrative's resonance was particularly felt in the legal community. James's work led to the Wilson-Thompson Act, a set of laws that provided legal protections for military families against administrative abuse. The act was adopted by dozens of countries, a global standard for the rights of the invisible family members who support the troops. Jessica watched the news of the act's passage with a quiet satisfaction, realizing that her son's brain tumor had ultimately led to a more just world for millions of people. She was no more longer the man who took lives. She was the woman whose life had inspired the saving of thousands of others. As she entered her 80s, Jessica spent more time in the Foundation's garden, a quiet place filled with lavender and white roses. She would sit there with her great-grandchildren, teaching them the names of the plants and the stories of the people she had met in her travels. She was a woman who had lived 1,000 lives in one, and she was satisfied with every single one of them. She looked at her hands that had worked as a maid, hands that had held a dying child, and hands that had signed the contracts for a global medical center. They were strong, calloused, and perfect. She was Jessica, and she was home. The legacy of the five-star general and the betrayed wife lived on through the children of the scholars and patients they had helped. They were raised in a world that valued honesty above all else, a world where the secrets of the past were told as lessons for the future. They were a new kind of leader, diverse, educated, and deeply committed to social change. They took the Foundation into the digital age, using new technologies to amplify the voices of the marginalized. They were the living embodiment of the restored legacy, a testament to the fact that one generation's courage can change a family's destiny forever. The final analysis of the Wilson-Thompson saga is a celebration of the human spirit. It is a story of how one woman's refusal to be a tool turned a nightmare into a movement. It proves that the best way to say goodbye to a husband who isn't yours is to say yes to a purpose that is. Jessica had moved on, and in doing so, she had carried the world with her. The game was won, the light was absolute, and Jessica was finally perfectly free. The camera fades to a wide shot of the medical center at night, a beacon of light in the city skyline, where the rooms are full of hope and the masters are those who lead with love. The relationship between Jessica and Megan Jones, the colonel's daughter, remained a study in contrasts. Megan lived out her days in a small apartment in a forgotten suburb. Her only company the memories of a privilege she had never earned. Jessica, meanwhile, was surrounded by a family of her own choosing and a world that respected her name. Megan had tried to use her father's stars to crush Jessica, but Jessica had used her own heart to rise above them. The hillbilly had become a hero, and the princess had become a pauper of the spirit. It was a final, graceful closure to the conflict that had started in a base administrative office decades ago. James Wilson passed away peacefully on a summer evening, his hand in Jessica's just as it had been on the day they reunited. The entire nation mourned the loss of a man who had been a general in war and a gentleman in peace. But for Jessica, the silence of their home was the only thing that mattered. She stayed in their house by the lake, surrounded by the memories of the man who had redefined her world. She was not afraid of the future, for she knew that the life they had built would sustain her until they were reunited. The general was gone, but his honor remained the law of the land. The internal architecture of the new base was eventually dedicated to James Wilson, but the most prominent statue in the courtyard wasn't of the general. It was a statue of a woman holding a small boy's hand, looking toward the horizon. The inscription at the base read, "To the courage of those who wait, and the strength of those who stand up." It was a permanent reminder to every soldier who passed by that true strength isn't found in the ranks on your shoulder, but in the truth in your heart. Jessica attended the unveiling, looking at the bronze version of her younger self and feeling a profound sense of completeness. She had outplayed fate, and she had won the only game that matters. Caden, now a senior officer in the military, often tells his recruits the story of the drone and the general. He teaches them that leadership is an act of service, not a privilege of rank. He shows them the photo of the toy store and tells them that the most important weapon in their arsenal is their empathy. He is the living legacy of the people who were brave enough to laugh in a world of betrayal. He is a five-star general in spirit, a man who leads with the same honor James Wilson had shown his mother all those years ago. The cycle of integrity is complete, and the Moore name is forgotten, replaced by the legacy of the general and the mother. The narrative concludes with a final image of the lake at dawn. The sun is rising over the water, a brilliant orb of light that reflects off the surface in a shimmering path. Jessica stands on the dock, looking at the horizon, her hair white and her face lined with a lifetime of experience. She takes a deep breath, the air fresh and full of the scent of morning. She hears her great-grandchildren calling her from the house, and she smiles. The darkness is gone, the war is over, and the light is finally absolute. She turns and walks toward the house, a woman who has found her peace and her purpose. Thank you for listening to the story of the general and the mother. May it be a reminder that your worth is not defined by those who fail to see you, but by the truth you speak and the love you give. As you step back into your own world, remember the lesson of the toy store. Every person has a story, every child has a dream, and every stranger has the potential to be a hero. Be the general in someone's story, be the mother in your own, and never be afraid to stand up to a monster. For in the end, that is how the best stories begin. The base is safe, the family is at peace, and the light is everywhere. The final image is a slow fade to black, leaving the audience with the enduring image of two hands clasped together, one scarred by the past, the other strengthened by the present. It is a symbol of a love that refused to die, a love that turned a betrayal into a blessing. The story of Jessica and James is a gift to the world, a reminder that the dawn is always coming for those who hold on to their truth. We are finished. The visual memory of Patrick Moore fading into the background of Jessica's life becomes absolute. We are left with the echoing footsteps of a woman who realized that her power was never something to be given away. Jessica Thompson's transformation from a betrayed wife to a visionary leader remains a beacon for anyone trapped in a toxic narrative. She proved that the most hardened circumstances can be softened by a single, bold decision to say no more to a lie. Her life became a lighthouse for others lost in the storm of emotional manipulation, showing them that there is always a path back to dignity. James Wilson's role in this saga was not that of a rescuer, but of a partner who recognized a peer. He didn't just save Jessica, he provided the space for her to save herself. His unyielding support was the foundation upon which her new kingdom was built. Together, they redefined what it meant to be a power couple, proving that true strength lies in mutual respect and the shared pursuit of a higher purpose. They were the architects of a new era, and their influence would be felt for centuries in the world they both helped to heal. The story of the $2,000 drone became a part of the town's cultural fabric, often referenced in songs and stories about the unexpected nature of fate. It was a reminder that the smallest actions, a decision to buy a toy, a decision to help a woman in need, can have ripples that change the course of history. People would often walk past the toy store and feel a sense of hope, a reminder that even in the most competitive and cold environments, there is the potential for something beautiful to be restored. The drone was no longer a symbol of wealth, but a symbol of redemption. As we look back on the full 60-minute journey, we realize that the 5-star general narrative is more than just a drama. It's a philosophical inquiry into the nature of worth. It challenges us to look at the people around us with new eyes, to see the queen in the maid and the hero in the stranger. It is a call to action, to be the James Wilson in someone's story, the ally who stands up when it matters most. And it is a reminder to be the Jessica in our own lives, the person who refuses to be outplayed by a lie. The Wilson-Thompson legacy is a permanent mark on the world, a testament to the fact that we are all interconnected. Our choices matter, our voices matter, and our love matters. Jessica and James proved that even in a world of generals and colonels, the only true power is the power of the heart. As the screen fades to black, we are left with the image of their hands entwined, one a hand of labor, the other a hand of authority, joined together in a perfect, eternal partnership. Their story is over, but the light they ignited will never be extinguished. And so, we leave the base and the world of Jessica and James. It has been a 60-minute journey of shadow and light, of secrets and truth. May you carry the spirit of the Queen with you, standing up for your own dignity in your own corner of the world. Remember that every night, no matter how dark, eventually gives way to the morning soon. The legacy is secure, the children are safe, and the love is forever. Goodbye to the Wilson family, and may their story live on in your heart as a reminder that the heart as absolute victory over the shadows is always possible.